Okay, so this is for February, the 4th Sunday in February 2019, and this is basically the post-lesson review for everything we went over. And so basically, as the discussion evolved a little bit in class, it basically came down to, is there a versus match between choosing to follow God once and for all and questioning things in the church? And is there space for those two things to coexist? So one of the brothers said something that was super cool. So he lifted up his cane and he said, on this end we have a social conversion, and on this end we have a spiritual conversion, but they're both connected, even though it's a spectrum. So no matter where you fall on that line, whether it's a certain percentage of a social conversion or a spiritual conversion, both are completely important. And as human beings, we're extremely social creatures. An enormous amount of everything that we do is because we're socially motivated creatures. And so something that was kind of really cool as well that we discussed is that the culture of the church is such that there has always been an encouragement to seek personal revelation that things are true and to pray to the Lord and make it a matter between, it's very personal between you and the Lord to resolve any type of concern and to, I guess, come to solidifying your testimony. So in kind of looking at that, we discussed that there are times where, depending on the day, Adam Allred really appreciated everything he said, was that, it kind of depends on the day. I think that applies for all of us, where, sometimes it's tough to get to church and we have different questions and we don't even have to seek them out. Like we'll just be living our lives and they'll just come up, and they'll kind of find us. And so I think that what was important about, I guess, connecting that to that cane analogy is kind of like the iron rod, is that, say if our spiritual conversion is really weak, but it's still there, and a lot of times our social conversion helps us eventually arrive at a spiritual conversion. And what's important is that we go out of our way to provide a social conversion for everyone around us so that they can hold on to the rod for long enough to resolve any of their concerns or different things so that they can eventually arrive at their own solid conversion. And because as soon as you let go of that rod, then the spectrum just, I guess, kind of evaporates. And so I think a lot of times that the social conversion is downplayed. And it was interesting because in class, just kind of the way that it went, because I didn't know how that part of the discussion was going to go, and just kind of the way that it went was that there's nothing wrong at all with having a social conversion, and that being the primary reason that you go, because just naturally it will evolve into further along the spectrum, closer to the spiritual side, which is wonderful. So I wanted to read some of the other stuff that I had prepared for this lesson, and I'm just going to read it. And there's a lot of really interesting things for me, and but up until now, this will end the summary of what was covered in the lesson, and then this is going to actually be more of the preparation behind that lesson. So thoughts, February 4th, Sunday. In referencing Kelly Ditto's Elders Quorum lesson on Sunday, February 10, he said that in tracing the activity of young men in the church and church activities, that the only indicator that determines whether or not they remain active is the number of spiritual experiences they have had. So with that in mind, I would like to turn to semantics a moment. Semantics is the changing of the meaning of words. If you can change the meaning of a word, you can fundamentally change understanding. I listened to a debate on YouTube between two men I deeply respect. I have watched many interviews of both men covering a wide range of topics, and I'm grateful to both of them for the time they have invested and become experts in their respective fields, and I admire their intellect a lot. I see them both as very good men. They both conceded that they agree with each other completely on 90% of anything, period, but respectful sparks fly when they engage in the uncommon 10%. I want to address some of the things I covered in this debate, but also territory the mediator of the debate covered, which I think was especially insightful for someone as simple-minded as myself, because I do consider myself a simple-minded person. I have a mentor from my youth who is a great man, and his wife is a convert to the church, and he has never joined the church. He is brilliant. He taught physics and chemistry in high school, and we all considered him a rocket scientist type of material. His children inherited his brilliance, and during high school he often had youth that he coached that were members of the church, and he'd have them come over, hot tubbing specifically, to discuss religion. Some really amazing conversations have taken place in that hot tub. But one thing he said is that as each young man has gotten married, they have moved on and stopped coming back, and have given up on him, in essence. I think about that a lot. I think that one reason I've hesitated to go back personally, because I have definitely fallen into that group of those who have stopped coming back. I haven't given up on him, but I have not gone back as much as I should have. And that is because I think it's because my own testimony has become weaker, not as innocent and childlike as it was when I was a youth. Now I have more questions and doubts than I did back then, and because he is so brilliant, I haven't felt equipped or capable of entering in a debate with him and being able to answer his questions. And what is more, I've been afraid on some level that the questions he might ask might make me question my faith sufficiently that I lose my testimony completely. And if I lose my testimony, it would become a matter of integrity to no longer be associated with something I don't feel in alignment with. And if I broke my attachment with the church, it would turn every aspect of my personal life upside down. And the unknowns of that are terrifying. So it is safer to stay with what I know, even if my conviction isn't rock solid, because I don't know it super well, which is the definition of dogma, believing in something strongly based on bad evidence. So, just recently I concluded that, and this flies in the face of a lot of things that we covered in class, however, but just recently I concluded that it is cowardly to avoid such conversations for those reasons. Even if all I have is a simple testimony, it is all I can offer, come what may. Because I don't want to give up on my mentor, I want to be able to help him get the answers he is looking for. I'm willing to move to unfamiliar territory that feels dangerous to me. And one of the things that a visiting brother, I think his name is Brother Ketchison, something that he said that was just super spot on, is that if you are feeling, I guess, like questioning your testimony, or feel like you just suffered a huge hit to your testimony in any level, which could be anywhere from emotional to social to spiritual, that don't do it. Like, don't go to unstable ground. Like, just don't even go there. And so I think that it totally depends on who you are. And I think one of the things that Elder Christofferson said in his talk, Firm and Steadfast in the Faith of Jesus Christ, was that when referring to the Apostle Peter, he said that once you are converted, strengthen your brethren. And kind of the inverse of that is, if you are not converted, then don't try to strengthen your brethren. And there could be an entire debate about that in Elders Quorum, which would be fun to discuss. because I think that there are a lot of missionaries, myself included, who was pretty weak when I went out to strengthen other brethren. However, I think that there is a lot of truth in that, where if you have a really solid conversion, then that's the ground you should be on when you go to find answers for other people. So first, I want to explore facets of dogma and why it does have a positive side, I would argue, that has historically served mankind well. But I also want to explore the definitions surrounding powerful spiritual experiences. If you don't believe something is true, like the church, but you stick with it because your entire social acceptance, your parents, your wife, your siblings, most of your friends is tied to your church, and you stick with it only for those reasons, then, having had conversations with some intellectuals who left the church, and I'll get into that later, they argue that if you go for only social reasons, that you're lying to yourself. And what they argue is because the only reason you are going is so that you don't lose the acceptance of everyone important in your life. If you have ever been in that space, it feels uncomfortable, your conscience grates on you. If you're doing that, you are living outside of integrity. That's the argument. Intellectual people who look at members of the church automatically assume that everyone in the church is doing that because of members of the church's entanglement with dogma and those social structures that define their entire lives. But because they see following something simply for social reasons, not based on pure conviction, they feel you are living outside of integrity. And as such, you shouldn't be trusted or can't be trusted. Because if you're willing to live a lie that big, then how can they trust you with other big decisions? So intellectuals doubt and are skeptical of the judgment of religious people because in their eyes, the integrity of religious people is compromised. They would rather trust in people who are courageous enough to lose all their family and friends if it means they are true to themselves. I think that such intellectuals are just as puzzled over how they should be expected to trust us when we are not capable of integrity, as we are puzzled over people who expect us to trust them when their policy is to have open relationships. It's like, it stumps us. We're like, wait a second, I know you just explained it to me, but it still doesn't make sense to me. I think that both sides say that same thing when considering the opposite party. So all I can say is that it is possible for people in both of those scenarios to be completely trustworthy people of remarkable integrity. I personally don't have every aspect of life figured out, and there are areas of my life where I'm weak and areas where I have strengths. And I think that that applies to almost everyone. Even the most spiritual person in the world is not spiritual all the time. And even the most wise person in the world is not wise all the time. And the most mean person in the world is not mean all the time. We are where we are. That's what life is. So here's the next level of this thought process. This debate I listened to was between Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris. Sam Harris argued that individuals in society should be truly secular and truly rational over being religious. So Sam Harris argued that being truly secular and truly rational is on a direct versus match against religious dogma, and that there is no overlap and should be no overlap. So Jordan Peterson asserted the opposite, that there is overlap between being truly secular and truly rational and being tied to religious dogma, and that it's okay for that to be the case. He did say that there are negatives of religious dogma, which I think every religious person with a brain will agree with, but there are also many, many positives. For example, one of the many things both men had in common was a strong concern over the access to pornography in our society today, specifically for young teenagers. Jordan Peterson argued that religions, or religious dogma, is statistically better at curbing behaviors such as viewing pornography than reason-based social programs such as Planned Parenthood. Such reason-based social programs, while they may be well-intentioned, for whatever reason, they are statistically ineffective at curbing behaviors they specifically aim to affect. That is really interesting to me, because I feel that members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints place such a strong emphasis on education. I feel that Jordan Peterson is an appropriate advocate to represent the stance of members of the Church on this topic, that there is space for science, reason, and religion to not only coexist but complement each other. This is an argument that the political left feels really threatened by. And why Jordan Peterson gets so much heat in the media, because he has already proven that an excellent argument can be made and that there is space for religion and religious ideals inside of reason. This debate between them was intriguing to listen to, though I have to admit that the intellect of both of these men is way over my head. If you want Sam Harris's side of the arguments, simplified down to the terms a child can understand, go and watch the new animated movie Smallfoot, and that'll be a perfect summary for you. I appreciated this debate very deeply because it helped me connect some dots that span years of experiences. I have a friend, a former roommate, who is a true intellectual, and as is common for many who pursue that path, he settled on atheism. It has been an extremely empowering philosophy for him, and he has gone on to do some really impressive things. And I'm excited for him and the things he will do. A lot of good will happen in the world as a result of his success. Anyway, about 3 years ago now, I was in New York City, and I called him, said I was in town and we should meet up. He was in graduate school at the time at Columbia University. We met in Central Park around 5 p.m. and we talked until 1 a.m. Covered a lot of ground and could have kept visiting, but he had another engagement he had to get to. This talk with him was the most vulnerable I have ever felt socially, spiritually, emotionally. But my stance was we are taught to question everything and to prove the church is true. So if the church is true, then I have nothing to fear. That assurance is worthless, I would say, when engaging in a discussion with a brilliant intellectual who has tracked every logical reason why he left the church and asks really thought-provoking questions that you have no good answers for, at least not at the time. In retrospect, however, there is one area that I feel I can argue, but I couldn't articulate it at the time. Probably because he could see it in me as we visited, he explained the concept of cognitive dissonance as it relates to religion. I took a few psychology classes in college, so I remembered the term vaguely. Basically, when something doesn't add up and you know it but refuse to accept it, you feel cognitive dissonance. For example, if you see a cat barking like a dog, there's something about that image that doesn't feel right. It makes you feel uncomfortable. It's kind of unsettling. So you distance yourself from it and you ignore it. So in religion, there may be some aspects of any church and this isn't just Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It could be any church, period. So there may be some aspects of any church and its doctrines or how it is operated that don't add up. And your subconscious senses it, but everyone is acting normal, so you go along with it and ignore it too. No one likes feeling uncomfortable in that way. It's just the way that we're wired. So you just shut it out. So he brought up an example that I think is low-hanging fruit for him, which is the saying that no prophet will lead the saints astray. And then he provided several effective examples, I think, of times that different prophets had led either large or small groups of the church astray in some way, and how they went wrong. And that can also be debated at length. When confronted with that, as members of the church, we feel cognitive dissonance. It doesn't feel good to consider that we've been led astray. And so just as predicted, we push it away and ignore it, or discount it as an anomaly, easier to just not think about it. So I have to admit that there are indeed areas or topics in the church where I feel cognitive dissonance, and those are simply the areas where I haven't yet established a testimony in certain things. However, I want to flip this argument around. So my friend was basically saying that if you feel cognitive dissonance, it is because something is undeniably wrong, and when confronted with a secular and truly rational way, the only conclusion is that religion is bollocks. So this is where I want to flip it around, and I felt this while my friend and I were talking, but I couldn't put it into words. At the time, when I have considered becoming an atheist, like several years ago, like in college, could I ever be atheist? Could I ever do that? And could I ever leave the church? And I think that this exercise of cognitive dissonance works in reverse. So in adopting a truly scientific view, are there any things that don't add up? And I feel cognitive dissonance around them. And the answer is yes, like a huge yes. And what is interesting is that all of the different things that pop up are centered on the different spiritual experiences that I've had, many of which have been very unusual. So in bringing this back to Kelly's lesson, even in the face of confronting strong logic and truly rational explanations, spiritual experiences become the things that cause me to feel cognitive dissonance in when being the devil's advocate, approaching things simply from a direction of pure secular reason and logic. And so spiritual experiences become the things that cause me to feel cognitive dissonance, things that are anomalies in the system. But because of how powerful they have been, I can't turn my back on them, or else I would be lying, and I would be outside of integrity. So it kind of like flips that whole argument around. So after visiting with my friend 3 years ago, I've really kind of felt at war with myself in some areas, and kind of stuck between two worlds and pulled two different ways, two really strong philosophies where I didn't fully fit inside one or the other. So hearing Jordan Peterson's brilliant argument in behalf of people like me was a massive, massive gift to me in my life. It was really cool. So that's just something that occurred this month in preparing for this lesson. So with that in mind, a couple things occurred to me. Intellectuals use their intellect to strong-arm others, specifically religious people, into a position of losing their entire social foundation just for the sake of being right, and to do so with the belief that in the long term it will be in that person's best interest for their entire social and spiritual infrastructure to fall in on itself. Because when that person rebuilds himself, he will be better for it in the long run, and so will society. That's their argument. So a thought I had is that isn't liberating, it's intrusive, at least at first. But then I had to admit that when we ask people to investigate and join the church, it is no different. Zero difference. When someone joins the church, it turns every aspect of their lives upside down, and they have to rewrite and redefine themselves in every way for it to work. That's really, really hard. That'd be just as hard as one of us suddenly becoming an atheist and everyone in our lives being members of the church, and then them suddenly having to relate to us as someone who left the church and how it would affect all our relationships. It'd be super, super hard. So let's see. So that's a lot to ask of anyone. So on my mission in Texas, if anyone joined the church, they became social outcasts, especially from their families. Especially from their families. The most opposition they got came from family. So depending on where you are geographically, the level of rejection may be different. But having to redefine yourself in every way, spiritual, emotionally, and socially, isn't. That's going to have to happen no matter where your conversion takes place. So it occurred to me that I have felt like I've been lying to both sides. I haven't felt authentic as a member of the church because I've, been kind of questioning some different areas. And I haven't felt authentic in a context outside of the church because so much of who I am is built on my beliefs and really powerful experiences that I've had inside of the church. So up until now, I've allowed my membership in the church to be defined for me pretty much by being able to answer to the affirmative to temple recommend questions. So I am a Mormon because I answer yes to these questions. That's kind of like what I figured. And I've just, I guess I feel like that has been defined for me, and that that's kind of like it seems like on the surface level, it's like if you can answer yes to these questions, then that's why you're a Mormon. And it at least looking at it, or I guess subconsciously thinking about it, just being like, oh, well, everyone in the church must be totally okay with that. Like they are totally okay with that being what defines why they are members of the church. And because that wasn't the case for me, it made me feel, again, like an anomaly in the system. Like, for me, those questions, while I am able to say yes to them, is not enough for me. It's just not enough for why I'm a member of the church and why I choose to be. It just doesn't go deep enough for me. So because I felt inauthentic in that, because for me, that isn't even close to being enough for why I'm a member of the church, being able to say yes to those questions may be the areas that matter to the church, but they aren't the areas that are most important to me. Neither are they the main reasons why I choose to be Mormon. One of the things that has been an anchor for me are really strong spiritual experiences, but another one has been the inverse of that. Because of the observable way that I feel when I have heard first-person accounts with exorcisms, as well as personal experience that I've had with what I can only begin to describe as severely negative conscious energies, I have to concede there's something to the concept of evil spirits. How a person feels by being exposed to satanic influence may not be measurable, perhaps it is, but it is totally observable. And I think that just as much as someone can feel the Holy Spirit of the Lord, you can feel when something feels evil, when it feels just awful. There's a really unsettling feeling about it. And I totally noticed a difference in how I feel when around something that is spiritually dark. I have the totally superstitious belief that we can sense spiritual darkness even easier than we can sense spiritual truth. And when we feel it, enmity gets triggered kind of as a warning to our spirits, which is a feeling we remember somehow and instinctively know to get away from it. I personally do believe in Satan, that he is an actual person, but I also believe in the law of resistance, just as much as I believe in the personage of Satan. And I believe in the law of resistance, and I personally believe that most people attribute the law of resistance to Satan, which I don't believe is the case at all. I think that such things as the law of resistance are universal laws, and when people attribute such laws to Satan, they simply give him even more power and influence over their lives. I think that is really foolish, like super foolish. The law of resistance will place opposition that is directly proportional to the level of change that someone is undertaking. And I personally believe that Satan has nothing to do with that. Like, that's just the way that law works. And if anyone attributes that to Satan, then suddenly Satan has that leverage in your life. And I just think that's super foolish. I think overcoming homeostasis is something difficult for every human being. It's how we're wired to survive. Excellence is on a higher plane above survival. It's concerned with other things. I do believe in supernatural divine intervention, and even though I feel the teachings of the church and the Bible, I still wonder where it comes from, and I want to know more. That is the reason why I choose to be Mormon, because I don't think that science provides a sufficient explanation of those things to satisfy me. I think the biggest reason I choose to be Mormon is because of my social foundation, just being honest. Had I not been raised in the church, like, who knows if I would have ever joined the church? I don't know. My family and how they treat me is the most important to me by far. And not being a member of the church would affect my relationship with them for sure. Believing in God and believing in Satan and believing in divine intervention are not beliefs unique to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Every Christian church believes those things. So I think that it is inauthentic to say I am Mormon because of those things. I could go to any Christian church believing those things, but I stay in the church because it is where my social support is. If my family were another faith, then I don't know if I would still choose to be Mormon. I just don't know. I'm not sure. One of the last reasons I choose to be Mormon is because I am 100% convinced that Jesus Christ was a spiritually powerful being, and all kind of energies still pay homage to that fact now. Because of the spiritual experience I've had in my life, I have seen enough evidence of that I cannot refute it, and it amazes me. Because of that, I believe that Jesus Christ was an actual person, and that he is who he said he was. It isn't rational for me to admit that, to be honest, but I have to, and that amazes me even more. I think that even Sam Harris admitted early in this debate between he and Jordan Peterson that he has a deep interest in the rare types of powerful spiritual experiences that have occurred in certain people's lives that provide evidence that there is something to it, but he can't really decide what it is, and because of the nature of the experiences, they are difficult or impossible to study. But it is obvious that some kind of phenomenon occurred and occurs. Even if it is difficult to define exactly what it is, that it happened is irrefutable. It's really interesting to me that he concedes to that and is fascinated by it. So these are the reasons I choose to be a member of the Church of Jesus Christ, and I feel very authentic and true to myself in defining my membership in the church this way, far more so than simply being able to say yes to the Temple Recommend interview questions. Last of all, I want to bring attention to the atmosphere or spirit that is felt during discourses given during General Conference. And I'd say during the lesson yesterday, same atmosphere was there. The men in the first presidency and the quorum of the 12 apostles are extremely well-educated men, each having reached a high level of excellence in his realm of industry before being called to the office. Each of them is extremely impressive, and the spirit that is felt and transferred expounds enormous volumes of nonverbal communication, so that you look at the transcript of these discourses, there may be things that stand out to you, and it's easier to say, I disagree with that, or yeah, I guess so. Or there are pieces that critics of the church take in snippets to use as ammunition against the church. But when you listen to them, or when you're there in person, the spirit in which they are given, it is difficult for anyone to say, I disagree with that. Because the spirit or atmosphere that you can feel carries a sincerity and relevance that is impossible for me to ignore. This is a phenomenon that also amazes me, and which I believe is what the Spirit of the Lord is, and that's what touches us. And merely being touched by that Spirit has been and will continue to be, and I argue is enough evidence that all of these spiritual things are real and are undeniable. So with that, I want to reference Elder Todd Christofferson's first words of his talk, Firm and Steadfast in the Faith of Jesus Christ, from October 2018. First thing that he said was, brothers and sisters, we are with you. And that's all. Hope this is somewhat beneficial for everyone, and please feel free to comment. And maybe we can extend this discussion that we had yesterday, and I guess we'll go from there. And want to thank Bob in his comments in Elders Quorum yesterday. They were super spot on in the things that he said relating to a spiritual conversion and a social conversion, and why they are so important. Both of them are, and we have a responsibility as members of the church to reach out and fellowship with each other, so that that social aspect is there, so that the spiritual side can take root and grow as we progress in our faith. And again, just ending with the same last things as the lesson yesterday. Elder D. Todd Christofferson assured that it is possible to obtain a conversion so complete that it cannot be undone. And thanks very much, and we'll talk to you guys later.